Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Alderton, and my mate Callum Goodall. And it's been a strangely busy week. We've had a summer of not very much going on, and then suddenly we signed another player, played a friendly. There's quite a bit to talk about. How are
Hopefully
you?
this happens every week. You just sign a player every week. That'd be great. Would that sync up? Would we have all our business done by the start of the season if we did one player just before the weekend? Just before we want to relax.
I think the classic West Ham answer at the moment is it depends on sales, Cal.
Yes.
Anyway, you good?
Yeah. All good.
Good.
Can't complain.
Kyle Walker-Peters then, straight in.
Let's do it.
Really didn't expect this to happen. Didn't expect, after all the news of him going to Besiktas, I looked on FOTMob on the day that it was happening, and he was down as a Besiktas player already over there. I'd assumed it was already done. I'd assumed that really he was someone that we'd moved on from. And yet, not only are we just a little bit interested, it just sort of immediately happened out of nothing, it felt like. What are your sort of just initial feelings on it?
Pleased, I think. I don't think I can speak for both of us, I assume, but I don't think he would necessarily have been top of our list of targets in that position. I think we probably would have, if we had our own way, or I certainly would have probably gone for a younger, maybe, option to compete. But I think when you zoom out and look at the amount of work that needs to be done this summer, picking up a player who can play multiple positions on a free, no idea what his wages are going to be, but I don't think he was on much at Southampton. Presumably he'll want a significant pay rise to be with us, but still it's not going to blow up our sort of wage structure. He's not going to be one of our best paid players. So I think when you consider all of that, and obviously the fact that he's a very serviceable, handy Premier League proven player with relationships within the squad with Ward-Prowse, I think lots of really good ticks and sort of fills a gap that needed filling and leaves all of the money still in the transfer kitty to get other business done. So, yeah, I'm very pleased with it, to be honest.
Yeah, I think whilst it would have been really nice to get a younger player in who can develop in the role, in many ways I'm happy enough getting someone. I mean, one of the big things I wanted to tick in this last one was someone who had a bit of positional flexibility. I wanted someone ideally who would be comfortable playing on both sides if we could find that, and that was very difficult to find. That's why Joaquin Saiz was actually someone I was really, really keen on for this last slot in the fullback positions. But also one of the reasons why Kyle Walker-Peters was quite high up my list, because his flexibility to play on either side, the fact that he's homegrown, the fact that he's got a pre-existing relationship with someone in the squad, played under him, he would have been captain Ward-Prowse at the time that Walker-Peters was there, so they've obviously got a relationship there. I remember reading years ago Walker-Peters talking about wanting to sort of eventually become a captain himself, despite being sort of seen as more of a laid-back figure and having learned from the leadership figures in the Southampton dressing room, like Ward-Prowse, to be praised for the way that he deals with teammates and players and the way that he supports people in the squad. That was something that he wanted to do going forward. So someone with that ambition and someone with his ability and, like I say, positional flexibility, put him quite high up my list, especially given the fact that I didn't really ever think that we would be talking about crazy wages, and sometimes when we do these things, or when we've done these things previously, signed an older player on a free to fill a slot in the squad, we have gone for someone who would be on really crazy wages, and this doesn't feel like that at all. This feels like a more sensible solution, like you say, in a window where we have a lot to do, a lot of other things to worry about. Let's start with the good things, and then we will come to the caveats, the things that we're worried about. And I think with Walker-Peters, there are lots of really good things to talk about, and I think in terms of the kind of player that Graham Potter will be interested in adding to the group, just in terms of where his strengths lie, I think Walker-Peters is a really nice fit for kind of the next stage of what we want to try and become as a team.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think the one that stands out for me is the sort of ball security. I think even in the Southampton side that was pretty terrible, let's be honest. I think he was the one player, Harwood Bellis as well, I would say, but when Russell Martin was in charge and he was sort of dogmatically committed to playing a very intense possession-based style of football that builds out from the back, a lot of the headlines were surrounding players that couldn't play that way and how Martin needed to change something to put the likes of Jack Stevens and stuff in the better conditions to succeed and handle the step up to the Prem. Which I think was the right sort of reporting, to be honest. I felt like that was true at the time. But I think what it did do was take the sort of shine away from the likes of Walker Peters, who by no means was sort of having a blinder of a season, but was sort of getting on with that style of football. It wasn't really something that he couldn't do. It was more that the parts around him were then bringing everything down. And you see that reflected in the data, just incredibly good in terms of his pass completion. I know it's the most baseline sort of thing, but for me, it's more important in defenders than any other position because you don't want to be losing the ball or misplacing passes in dangerous areas. So bringing someone like Walker Peters, where we expect that the demands of Graham Potter are going to be to build up from deep areas and come deep and offer reliability and ball comfortability in those areas. I think Walker Peters does that and can do it in a number of positions, as we've already said. So I think that's huge. And when you think about sort of what we saw with Wan-Bissaka, I'm not saying that he's necessarily going to start ahead of him, but there is obviously a world in which they could both potentially play right wing back and left wing back. I think you don't get all of what Wan-Bissaka does. I don't think he's necessarily as active or as good a defender, but in terms of that sort of combination play, the bounce passes inside to then just run beyond and receive again and carry forward into the final third, I think you can replicate a lot of that stuff. And one of the things we often found ourselves saying throughout last season was, I wish we had Wan-Bissaka on the other side. Everything's too predictable down that right-hand side. And I think we probably all expect Diouf to start on that left wing-back slot. And I hope he does because it's really exciting. But if he doesn't necessarily take to the Premier League as quickly as we'd like, which is completely fair for a 20-year-old, you have Walker Peters who can do a lot of the stuff that Wan-Bissaka does over there. Or you could flip it around and play Walker Peters on the right and Wan-Bissaka on the left and get some stuff out of that. So I think that's really exciting. And I think it's probably the thing that we're going to look at first in every player we bring in this window, right? Because everyone needs to be comfortable in possession because that's what Potter needs. And I think, Walker Peters is ticking that box, which is, enough for me.
Yeah, well, we've heard previously that retention is something that Potter is quite keen on in the wing-back positions, players who are able to keep hold of the ball and bring some element of risk, to bring progression ultimately, but to do so without losing the ball at significant rate. And I think, in a nutshell, that kind of is what Walker Peters does. He brings a level of risk to help you progress play, but rarely loses possession when he's doing that. I also think with him, one of the things that is really nice, and you talked about it in comparison to Wan-Bissaka, but we should highlight it directly. He is actually one of the better carrier, dribbler, fullbacks / wingbacks about. And there are many reasons which we'll come on to why he maybe hasn't been as hyped as other players have been who have those skills in the fullback or wingback positions. But just purely on that side of things, he is actually really, really, really good as a dribbler. And one of the things that helps him there is how comfortable he is off both feet. So he's very unpredictable. He can go to the byline. He can cut inside. He does both regularly off both sides of the pitch. So for a full back up against him or a wing back up against him, it's very difficult to predict exactly what he's going to do, which makes life a lot easier for him when he wants to move forward. I think his decision making in the final third is excellent. I think he makes really, really good decisions in the final third, which is something I felt we've needed for a while, shall I say.
At least a season.
Yes, I'm sure some people will be laughing back, remembering a few posts I did about one side Benrahma years ago, a certain comp following a game against Wolves. Decision making has not always been our strength in the final third, and I'm not going to hold Walker Peters up as someone who's going to be game breaking on this side of things, but I think, if you even just go and look at the assist that he got, I think it was against Leicester, with Southampton last season, where he wins the ball high on the left hand side himself. He exchanges with Flynn Downs, does really well. He's right on the touchline. He's being pressured, and he manages to flick the ball back round to Flynn Downs. There's maybe about a 15-20 second gap there where he's just holding the width on the left hand side, waiting for the next time that he can be involved. The ball is played wide to him. He receives it, a couple of step overs, takes James Justin on the outside, takes it to the byline, stops it, and cuts it back to Aribo, who's arriving last after all the forwards have gone forward. And Aribo just slots it into the far corner. And it's a really, really nice goal. Showcases his ability to press out and win the ball high, showcases his ability to combine with teammates and to know where to move next to be of use, not that I play the pass and then I'm kind of done. And this is something that we got really nicely out of Emerson. Always really good at passing and moving to make things easier for the receiver. And then what we didn't get out of Emerson was that next bit was, could you dribble past someone and then create something in the final third? He shows in this instance that he can do that. And that's something that actually, when he was playing in a more dominant team, which was Southampton in the Championship, I mean, he was popping as like a top 1% XA shot creating action fullback in the league. So he's far too good for that level. And I think the hope will be, or the idea will be, that he'll be able to replicate more of that attacking output at a team that is able to arrive in the final third a little bit more than Southampton were last season. I think almost... I wouldn't be surprised if about 50% of Southampton's final third entries came in the 2 games against us last season, because they were really quite good in the games against us.
I thought Ivan Juric was going to fix it all in that. Yeah, I was like, whoa, what an appointment.
Paul Anuachi doing up crazy stuff, being really difficult to handle in the box. I think that really nicely summarizes some of his strengths. I also think it's worth discussing how sometimes with wingbacks, and I think we'll get this a little bit with Diouf, which is not at all a problem, you get real width holders, players that are going to play as far wide as possible and are going to focus on delivering as much as possible into the box, lots of crosses, and kind of quite clear modes of production. What I really, really like with Walker-Peters is the flexibility. We haven't often had, or really... not to my mind anyway, had many options in these positions where you would feel confident about the idea of them coming into midfield, confident about them coming into more central areas to release through balls, comfortable about them rotating with the winger and becoming more of the, if you're playing a 3-box-3, more of the 10 while the winger holds the width. Walker-Peters can do all of those things really comfortably. I think he's really good at all of those things, actually. His ability to pick out passes that break lines in the middle and final thirds is really good, and he often does that very well when he steps inside off the flank. So I think that's a nice thing when you're considering the potential usage, which is something we're going to come on to later in this podcast, of the 3-5-2 that we played quite a lot towards the end of last season. And you think in that context, how does a Crescencio Somerville fit in as well as he might otherwise in this shape? I think maybe with someone like Walker-Peters who can come in off the flank, you give a winger that maybe doesn't have a natural position, same for Guilherme, in that shape, the opportunity to move wider and play in those areas that they would like to find themselves in more often anyway, with Walker-Peters taking up the more central positions. Last strength that we probably should definitely highlight for me would be, I think this is going to come with a lot of caveats, which we'll come on to. He can, in theory, play, and did last season on several occasions, play as a wide centre-back.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, like you say, in theory, I think it depends on the style that the shape that plays in, if that makes sense. Like if you were doing a sort of Catenaccio style Italian deep sort of 3-box, defend the box, and you have to be a wide centre-back that can nod the ball out. No. But if it's a 3-back where you commit, say, the right-sided winger or whoever the width holder is ahead of him, be that Wan-Bissaka, and then he sort of ends up in a de facto sort of right-back position anyway, because the back 3 turns into a back 4 and then Wan-Bissaka becomes a right winger. In that scenario, very handy. In in a not dissimilar way to some of the moments we saw with Cresswell last season when he was filling in at left centre-back. He's not a tall, sort of aerially dominant defender, but he's incredibly comfortable on the ball. He can receive it from the goalkeeper. He's a very high volume receiver off the centre-backs, and then can help you play out and aid in that way.
Walker-Peters almost exclusively did that on the left side last season with Southampton anyway. So when we're thinking about trying to fill that position and replicate some of what Cresswell was able to give us with that tactical flexibility, but also with someone that does play a bit more like a fullback in a centre-back position, who stops the back three from being quite so flat, who makes more aggressive commitments out of possession, who makes more aggressive commitments in possession. We didn't get enough last season out of the back three of centre-backs going and overlapping or underlapping, driving into the final third to add an extra body when we've arrived there to try and create some chaos. You don't want it all the time, but you need it at the right moment sometimes to shake that moment out where you create the big chance. And Cresswell years ago would have given us that, playing in that position, but not so much. He
still tried it. He just didn't have the legs necessarily, but the intent was there.
34, 35, less likely to be able to give that and less likely to be able to recover if the team loses the ball when he's doing that. Walker-Peters, however, comfortable doing that regularly. Also, and probably a nice last thing to come on to, rapid, quick. He's very good at making impressive recoveries. And another game that I watched today, I watched back there, 3-2 defeat to Liverpool, and you're looking at, I think it was 2 balls over the top for Salah in that game where he was in a 1v1 foot race with Salah. He won both of those, which gives you an indication of how fast he can be when he really needs to go to help his team as sort of the last man back in those situations. So again, thinking about bombing from wing back, but then also thinking about maybe in some situations, I think particularly left centre back, with someone like Diouf recruited as a left wing back who could play really, really high on that side, being able to just give you that cover that you don't necessarily get with some of the other centre backs that we have. Not that they're really slow, but don't move with that speed. I think that's a really, really nice thing to add to the squad. We're going to take a break there, and then we'll come on to a couple of concerns in those different positions with Walker-Peters. Let's keep it brief on things we're worried about, and then we'll move on to how this impacts some other players in the squad. What role is he likely to take? How many minutes we see him having? All of these questions. The weaknesses for me are just really obvious. He's quite dual averse, which I think is a good thing because he's not the strongest. Which is not really his fault. He's just smaller frame for a fullback or for a defender in the Premier League. And then really the bigger ones for me, positioning, particularly when he's playing as a wide centre-back, not always the most consistent. Aerials, not always the best. And then lastly, pressing when given man-to-man responsibilities in the defensive third. So very good middle thirds and final thirds, jumping to support press, actually really good at winning high turnovers. When you get back towards your own goal and he's got to jump out to a winger, I think sometimes that can be a little bit too quick and make it a little bit too easy for the next pass to be played. Yeah,
I think you've picked up everything that I wanted to mention, really. I think my main concern around all of those really is that whilst he's bringing in a lot of good stuff to the defence that I think we needed, I think he's also bringing a lot of weaknesses that are already present within the defence as well. So it's when we're not sort of ironing them out, we're kind of going, oh, okay, we're just going to make peace with that then, are we? in the same way that Wan-Bissaka, for all his strengths, I think in those moments, we saw certainly towards the first half of the season, just as he was bedding in, there was definitely those similar issues with regards to positional discipline, sort of when to step out,
and passivity,
yeah, exactly. So, and then when you get back to those wide centre backs as well, I mean, one of the biggest gripes is it's also one of the biggest strengths of someone like Mavropanos, but it is just that decision making and the timing of those engagements that they have to be so bang on the money, because as soon as they're half a second out, you're beat. You then have to turn around and try and get back, but by that point the winger's way gone and into the box. So yeah, it is an issue, but do you know what? Like, all of these defenders that you could potentially bring in on a free or on the cheap, that none of them are going to be the perfect defender, right? Because if they were, they'd be somewhere else. And in the grand scheme of things, do I think all of Walker-Peters' strengths outweigh those potential issues 100%? And do I also think that Graham Potter as a manager is the right sort of manager that can make sure that those scenarios are at the very least limited? You can't stop them happening in games, because obviously that's up to the other team. If they're going to try and focus on that, they're going to make those scenarios happen. But I think Potter, we've seen he's less likely to put players in those positions where those sort of weaknesses are exposed quite so often. So whilst obviously I'd love to have a defender come in that can just do it all and play in all the positions and be the best in the position at all times, never going to happen. And I think we've addressed so many issues by bringing him in that I think I'm willing to sort of overlook some of those weaknesses. I also think that sometimes in terms of when he's being faced up with dribblers as well, he can be a bit lacking. I think if you stand him up 1-to-1 and you can get that sort of, I don't even know the right fleet-footedness, I guess. That's a tricky winger that can stand you up and just has that sharpness right off the burst. I think Walker-Peters can look like one of the weaker sort of wide defenders in the league. But again, I think it's making sure that those scenarios, he's got the support of either the central centre-back to come out and engage if they do go beyond, or if he's playing wing-back, the wide centre-back can step up and press out to support him once he's been beaten as well. So I think system-wise, we should protect some of those weaknesses, but yeah, it would be wrong of us not to flag them because they certainly exist.
I suppose the nice thing for flexibility here as well is that you've got two wing-backs or wide defenders that proved their 1v1 ability last season in the Premier League, and two wing-backs or wide defenders who proved their ability going forward in either the Premier League or in the Czech League last year, and Walker-Peters one that showed that a lot more, like I said, when he was in the Championship in a more dominant side, which is obviously in part the Championship being an easier league to play in, yes, but also just a lot to do with being able to actually have the ball in the final third. I think Southampton had the second least possession in the final third of any team in the Premier League last season, something like 20% of the... it was really not something they were able to do. We weren't able to penetrate the final third much at all. And frankly, I watched 3 Southampton games today, the Liverpool game, the Leicester game, and a game against Newcastle.
Sorry, mate.
And yeah, I know. And I would say the vast majority of the moments where they were able to find some upside in the final third, pretty much either Walker-Peters or Fernandez, they're the two guys that did it for them the vast majority of the time. So that I think that's a good indication that when you can stand out for those things as a defender, even sometimes when doing it from like wide centre back, like actually linking and then playing a pass that breaks 2 lines into a forward that's able to turn and get a shot off. When you stand out like that as someone who's so far back a lot of the time, a team that's really struggling, I tend to think that's quite a good thing. So yeah, lots to outweigh, I think, the concerns, although those concerns do remain. And I think that probably, changes where you might want to use him or when you might want to use him. You probably don't want to look at him in the games, like you said, against some of the strongest 1v1 wingers in the league, because I don't think that's his strength. But then when we need someone to help us creatively in the final third, maybe you could change that relationship from where he's played as a wide centre-back last season. You could maybe use Wan-Bissaka like that on the right-hand side and him ahead of Wan-Bissaka to try and generate a little bit more upside in games. You could use that as a second-half solution if you're struggling to break down a low block against a team that you feel that you should be beating. I think there are nice solutions there. One question I have, and I'm going to go and do some research on this while you answer it. I'll answer onto this one actually, because I think it'd be interesting to see homegrown requirements now after he has signed. Where are we at, and does it change anything that we're looking for in what's left of the window? Obviously, very nice to get a player who can tick that box, because it's always a major anxiety making sure that you have the right numbers.
Yeah, of course, and even more so when you're in Europe, which obviously we're not, but we have ambitions to be. And with the squad that we've got, you would hope some of these players, particularly if we continue to sign younger players, will be sticking around so it can continue into the next season. But I believe, if my current tracking is up to date, we're at the homegrown capacity. Well, not capacity, obviously he could field this 25-man squad of English people if he really wanted to, but I don't know how good it'd be. I'm pretty sure on 8, 10 if you include players under 21, but obviously we don't need to register Ollie Scarles or George Earthy, although they would qualify as homegrown if we did. But yeah, I've got Fodringham, Kilman, Wan-Bissaka, Walker-Peters, Ward-Prowse, Freddie Potts, Jared Bowen, Crescencio Somerville. That's 8. So basically anyone we sign now, we don't have to worry if they're homegrown or not. Obviously, depending on whether people leave, but I can't imagine any of those homegrown players are likely to depart anyway. I think they're all either crucial starters or squad players. I include Fodringham as a crucial third choice goalkeeper.
Yeah, it's really nice to get the Crescencio Somerville homegrown boost, isn't it? I think there was some question marks about that before he joined us, and it makes a big difference to get a young player with a lot of potential in as a homegrown player, even if it's not necessarily in the spirit of the of the rule.
Loopholes, baby.
And fingers crossed we'll be repeating that trick with Luis Guilherme.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Look, what I was just looking up while you were answering that question, you fielded that for just long enough to give me the time, so thank you. AFCON is when he's going to be almost definitely, well, he will be playing during that period.
Assuming he doesn't break his leg before then.
Yes. And that is opposition during that time: Man City, Fulham, Brighton, or Wolves, Nottingham Forest, and Spurs. Those are the 6 teams we're playing during that period of time.
Okay, so some of them have got very good wingers. One Mohamed Kudus, Forest, and all the bloody wingers they've got, and however they replace Alanga.
They're on forwards, aren't they, at the moment? But yes, there'll certainly be new ones in.
City's
right at the start. AFCON, I think, starts on the 21st of December, and we have City currently slated for the 20th, so there's no way the players that will be going will be around for that. So yeah, some tough games in there, but I will say not as bad as it could have been. You know,
no,
you could have been looking at a run of teams, all top 4, top 5 teams. You know, you could have had Arsenal and Liverpool in there. I think less concerned right now when you look at the squads with like Wolves, Forest, and Fulham. They're teams that I think Kyle Walker-Peters will be all right in those situations. Also, I think he'll be fine anyway. It's just we're being...
It's not our first choice, is it? Wan-Bissaka and mumble his name, El Hadji Malick Diouf, what we assume are the first choice right wing back and left wing back. I can't see how Diouf wouldn't be, given how much we spent on him and how sought after he was. And yeah, with both of those likely to depart, it will just be a case of, we assume, Walker-Peters and Scarles stepping into those roles.
Yeah, it's not... Yeah, I should clarify. It's not me saying that he won't be playing the rest of the time. That's just me saying he's definitely going to be playing at that time. So we know he's going to be up against those wingers. And then we can forecast how some of those individual battles might work. And actually, that's a kind of good moment to ask you the next question, which is on my list, which is... We're talking about who the starting 2 wing-backs are. We've just signed a 28-year-old wing-back who will have ambitions of, proving himself at a high level again and hopefully getting back into the England conversation if he can, because he's been in that conversation previously. Where does this all leave young Ollie Scarles, who obviously did so well to break into the team last season, performed really well defensively, but perhaps didn't show as much as he would have liked going forward? It feels like... things have changed a lot for him in the matter of a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I will say that I think a lot of it probably still depends on who the club think they're going to be able to get rid of. I think if this was how the squad was going to be and no one else that was a serious contender to start was going to leave, then I probably would be looking at potentially a loan where he's guaranteed minutes in the Championship, just because... Are you getting in ahead of Wan-Bissaka, Walker-Peters, El Hadji Malick Diouf, and Emerson? Probably not. If Emerson does leave, then I think you are technically still the second choice left wing back, even though Walker-Peters and Wan-Bissaka can both play there. But you are the natural left-footed option to back up Diouf. And also Walker-Peters, as we say, is going to be competing across a number of positions. He could be a wide centre-back on either side. He could be a wing-back on either side. So it's not as if it's like a straight shootout between you and Walker-Peters in the exact same position. And then with AFCON as well, there are obviously going to be minutes up for grabs when the squad is depleted. It's not guaranteed that Scarles is going to be the starter while AFCON's on, because there's a world in which Somerville plays wing-back and then you shuffle Walker-Peters over to left wing-back. But there is definite competition there, and Scarles has already proven that he can break in if he impresses. So, yeah, that's a long way of saying I think it depends if Emerson leaves and what happens at centre-back, because if you then go and bring in one, probably not two, but certainly one centre-back, then that means Walker-Peters' minutes at wide centre-back are probably reduced somewhat as well, because there's more competition there and there'll be people ahead of him. So it becomes trickier for Scarles, but I think ultimately it all hinges on Emerson. I think if we get Emerson out the door, then I keep Scarles, and you just make sure you play him enough and you move people around and you make sure that you manage his development in a season where we're hoping that maybe we can knock on the door of Europe, but realistically we're aiming for a mid-table or top half finish. Therefore, you can afford to commit some more time to Scarles' development because you're not in a position where you're really looking up or down in the league table. But yeah, depends. It doesn't really seem like anyone's that asked about Emerson at the minute, so we'll have to wait and see.
It seems pretty certain that Emerson is going to leave. I don't think was he even with the squad in the.
I don't think so. He would have played, wouldn't he? So
I don't think he was with the squad for the training camp, which I think is a clear indication that
he's it's not just how much we can get of him, isn't it, and how long it drags on.
Exactly. I think the question of how long, not is a question of like if, when, not if.
In which case, stick around unless Maxwell Cornet has an absolute unreal shift at wing back in the next game, because he didn't really move me in that first one.
And that's what we're talking about next. Last section is going to be on Grasshoppers, what we learnt tactically. I actually want to speak about Ollie Scarles there because I think there's some interesting stuff to speak about. And then light of links plus players in, what's the squad shaping up like? How do we envisage the team playing as the sort of primary option next season based on, hands up, very early indications from friendlies, right? It's the first friendly. Never pay attention to the first friendly, but we got to talk about it. We got a podcast to do. Well, like I say, never talk about the first friendly. I don't know that there's ever that much to take out of it, because at the end of the day, really what you're doing is you're just completing the fitness work that happens in the first leg of preseason, and you always get the situation where it's 45 minutes one team, 45 minutes another team. You're often not playing the best opposition either, so it can be very difficult to learn anything, sort of take anything conclusive out of the first friendly. But I think there were some interesting things to come out of it. And before we do that, I think I'll start with nice to see a couple of new faces on the score sheet. Players that you haven't seen scoring goals before, getting goals in West Ham colours. Yeah,
man, great for Marshall. And I think the reporting that's come out of it today in the press seems to be that Potter is quite happy to keep Marshall around the squad for the whole season and sees him as someone who can contribute with minutes off the bench, which is good for him. And yeah, pleasing for us. Obviously, I'm always going to be happy when Andy Irving scores, so I'm not going to complain about that. Do I think he has a similar fate to Marshall? I'm not sure. But he didn't look lost. He didn't look lost out there.
No, well, he wouldn't. He's a very good player. He's proven that before as well. I thought he looked very good in that Chelsea game last season. So, yeah, I think lots of really nice things to take out of it. I think there were some really nice performances in there. I think the ones that stood out most to me, to be honest, were from familiar faces. I thought Ward-Prowse played quite well in the first half. I thought Soucek played quite well in the second half. So, I think that the names you're used to doing well again. And classically doing well not together. So yeah, nice to see that again. But tactically, I do think there was an interesting thing to take out of that first half, which was the usage of Ollie Scarles as kind of that exactly what we were describing, the system where you have sort of a hybrid usage of a fullback player who can play maybe as a wide centre back. It felt like that was sort of the role that he was given, where we were tucking back into a back five shape out of possession, and he was playing as the wide centre back, and then in possession he had a bit more freedom to move up the pitch like a fullback when we advanced through the middle third and into the final third. And actually, if you think just about his frame and what he did last season and how he did well in the duels and stuff, I guess that makes sense to just see what that looks like in these preseason games.
Definitely worth testing it out. I think, as you said, frame-wise, it makes a lot of sense. I think when you think as well in terms of the areas on the pitch that he's likely to get into or could get into playing in that position rather than sort of a out-and-out wide receiver, almost touchline hugger, and you think about what he was really good at youth level when he was playing in more central areas, that sort of combination play, much more secure and reliable in possession, ability to pick up pockets of space in the pitch, but then sort of drift out wide and create a bit of a nuisance out there. I think that really suits someone in that role. As we were saying earlier in the pod with Walker Peters and that sort of, and Cresswell too, actually, that ability to sort of contribute from deep areas and then just know the right moment when to push forward and try and create that sort of third man run, push the defence back a bit, try and pin them in by forcing them to commit. I think Scarles has shown that he can make those runs. I think a lot of the time last season, actually, there were moments where it might not have been picked up on broadcast, but certainly in the stadium, you could see the frustration that he would make the run and then it wouldn't get the ball played in. Not for any sort of nefarious reasons. It wasn't like people don't trust him and therefore don't want to play the ball. It's just one of those, you've got a young lad trying to make an impact and he's making off-ball runs that in training he's being told to do. And unfortunately, the player's gone funneled down the other side and it feels like a waste of energy. But those sort of movements are sort of hard-coded into him. You see it even when he doesn't necessarily need to do it because it's never going to come. And I think that, that could really suit him. And then I also think, like you say, I think frame-wise it suits him in those 1v1 duels. I think I can see him as a really good wide defender stepping out and springing out to those wingers once they've bypassed the wing-back, particularly if you've got someone like Hadji Malick Diouf who's going to be much higher and much further forward. Having someone who can step into that left-back area is a real positive for that dynamic. So I'd be really interested to see him continue to develop there, and also just in terms of squad makeup, maybe that's where he gets his minutes. If he's going to be able to play in that position as well as left wing back, perfect. That's going to serve him really well. My only concern, and I guess it is a big concern, is that...
Get used to the high ball, mate.
Yeah, exactly. That's precisely it. It's like the one issue we've had all season is that reading the flight of a ball is perhaps not his biggest strength. And if you're going to be wide centre back, you need to be comfortable, particularly defending that back post. And I don't know how comfortable I feel with that, but he's a young lad and sort of thing that you can learn, you can pick it up. And there's plenty of players to learn from with regards to that, because we do have a few good players in the squad that can do that very well.
What did you think about in those moments where we got to see sort of the idea of something that can feel both like a 4-3-3 and like a 3-5-2 at the same time, where Bowen gets a little bit of freedom to sort of float off of Füllkrug and have this sort of interdependency between the two, where we know that Füllkrug likes to come deep and Bowen can go beyond in those moments, and actually the dynamics that creates as compared to when we saw a lot of Bowen and Kudus last season, where both of them want to go beyond as much as possible, and actually developing the relationship where one kind of drops to enable the other was quite difficult for us to get going last season. And we ended up with these games where I actually think they did a lot of really good hard work, but they weren't really able to create the right conditions between them to arrive in the spaces they wanted to. It was a lot of sort of like one person doing a lot of running one game, one person doing a lot of running the other game, but not necessarily the right kind of connectivity or relationship between the two to actually upset the defense. I think that that's quite an exciting idea for Bowen specifically, because I do worry about his ability to have the kind of impact in behind in the right half space, getting into the shooting positions he wants from the classical 3-box-3. And this relationship with Füllkrug dropping in the right moments might actually really, really help him to be much more impactful as a goal scorer. And I know he was impactful as a goal scorer last season, but actually as a more consistent sort of chance getter, someone who racks up a lot more sort of XG across the course of a season.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a much more complementary pairing. I think Füllkrug is he's definitely a clinical finisher and he's a nuisance in the box, but I think he's certainly an unselfish striker, even though he might sort of not look like the archetypal unselfish striker because he's a big old unit that can rocket a ball in. But like you say, his facilitation play around the box is really good. And I think we've seen that even last season in the limited minutes. Like he does sort of pick up the ball and instantly get his head up and look to see if there's a runner on beyond, whether that's behind him or whether that's out wide or whether it's back into midfield for someone then to make the more incisive pass because they've got a better field of vision. So I think that's really promising. And I think Bowen, we know, off ball is a real strength of his in terms of being able to occupy space, but also run very quickly at the right moment into that space so that his sort of left foot has been pulled back and then is ready to go when he arrives to meet the ball. And that can only be a real positive. And I think it's really interesting in terms of, as you say, when it sort of can transition into a 4-3-3. When you think about some of the experimentation we've seen Potter look willing to do, whether that's sort of Somerville as a wing back or whether that's Diouf as a left wing back, but sort of a left winger really more so. And with someone like a Walker-Peters or a Scarles in that left centre-back role and Wan-Bissaka dropping into a right-back role when in transition defence, Bowen can then peel out into that right wing position in the 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 type situation that we've seen him do so well in. Füllkrug can be the focal point, but then, as we say, Diouf can become that winger or Somerville can become that winger. And I think all of a sudden, whilst the idea of someone like Somerville as a wing-back sounds scary on paper, even though we did see it work for 45 minutes, it doesn't feel natural. When you sort of picture that shape and, what we've just arrived in is Bowen right wing, Füllkrug up front and Somerville on the left, all of a sudden that's exactly how we would expect it to function. So I think it's really, really exciting from that sort of positional flexibility sort of dynamic scenario where, okay, if that isn't working, if we don't think the 4-3-3 is the right shape to arrive in all the time, Bowen can just sit a bit more central and the two of them can pin onto the centre-backs and then sort of create those chances for other players with late arrivers, as we sort of see with Irving's goal, right? Bowen does a lot of the hard work. He drifts out into the right space, carries into the box and unselfishly spots the late arriver. You could very easily substitute Thomas Souček into that Andy Irving run and he could score that goal, or any other midfielder that has that sort of thing on lock. But Souček is the obvious one for us. So it's nice to sort of be able to imagine how, yes, obviously all the players weren't on the pitch at the same time showing these relationships. It's the first game of pre-season, but very quickly I can see how and why we're doing a lot of the things we're doing and who could be doing them when the strongest 11 is on the pitch. And I think that's really promising, really promising. And I think in build-up as well, there was a lot more sharpness with the passing, a lot more willingness and awareness of when to drop deep. I thought Ward-Prowse was brilliant. I think you already said you were impressed by his first half. And I thought in terms of him just dropping in, showing bounces to Wan-Bissaka, even to Debo, I think he still looked a bit scary out of possession in some moments, getting really challenged by Grasshoppers players. I was like, not quite what I want to see. But in possession, really seemed to understand it. And everyone did, frankly. I think compared to sort of where we were at the start of last preseason, where we were 2-0 down at half-time to Ferenc Varos or whatever, and I was a bit like, I don't know quite what's going on here. This isn't what I expected. It seemed like the players were really understanding it already, which is really good, and should only get more sort of second-nature-y or comfortable, one might say.
I think it also seems like the coaches have a really clear idea over what they want to implement, which wasn't necessarily the case going through preseason into last season. There was an idea of what we wanted to do, but there wasn't necessarily the clarity over who would be executing roles. There wasn't the confidence in seeing people in different roles. Things weren't working, so we weren't landing on things that we felt confident about. Whereas now I think we've seen lots of players fulfill different roles competently, and it's now about finding the kind of ability to be more dangerous, more threatening going forward to actually become the kind of team that the manager will want us to be. I think just from my side, to sort of sum up my feelings, I think we've had a lot of discussion about whether, is it going to be a 3-5-2? Is it going to be a 3-box-3? What exactly will the shape be? I think more what we're seeing is that maybe you could start with any of those shapes or systems on paper, but actually they can all move through quite fluidly each other. And actually what I really like about that is if you just started with it as a 3-5-2 on paper that it was last season, with one midfielder in front of the defence, two ahead of that, and then the two forwards, I think you can give someone like Bowen the responsibility for dictating what it is at any given moment. So you can allow him to go make his run beyond, and then it's quite simple for the right-sided 8 and Fulkrug. Fulkrug can drop out a little bit to the left, the right-sided 8 can advance a little bit, and there you have your 3-box-3, or it can feel like more of a 2 and Fulkrug goes and the right 8 steps up to be more like a 10 slotting behind them, or the left 8 can do that. You can also have moments where the left wing back can come inside, like you were describing with Somerville or someone like that, or Diouf playing that role, come inside and advance more to a number 10 style position. And if you're going to be playing a fullback at centre back, they can slot out and move wider, and then you arrive into one of a more of a classic 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 structure. I like that there's that flexibility being baked in. I like that there are a lot of players who can execute a lot of these different roles and move naturally into these different spaces. Ward-Prowse very comfortable moving from that deepest midfielder to more of a channel exploiting number 8 kind of midfielder. Soucek very comfortable operating more as a kind of in between the boxes number 8, but then really bombing to be more like a 10, arriving in the box a lot of time. Fulkrug comfortable as a 9, but happy to drop out and feel like a 10. Bowen right wing, right 10 striker. Somerville wing back 10, out wide. Lots of really nice, and like we say with Walker Peters, Wan-Bissaka, Scarles, trying to develop this flexibility across a lot of these players that play in the wing back positions, where you can go from wing back to full back to centre back, and you can be different things to the team depending on what the team needs you to be in any given moment. So that flexibility, that kind of comfortability, not being necessarily wedded to a very clear idea of shape that we talked about when Potter was first hired as West Ham manager, and we talked about as being absolutely fundamental to the kind of squad building that would be necessary in the interim period, because there was no way that in one window we could fix everything that we needed to, and it would be useful to us to have a manager who would be able to go, well, all these guys are here and I can find a role for all of these guys in something that operates in a more flexible way. I'm not sitting here and saying, oh, that's a success, that's happened, or it's going to be a success, it's going to work. I can see how that process and that idea is being utilized and how we're approaching things, just off the back of what we finished last season with, and a very early indication from the first preseason friendly. And like I said, no conclusions. This isn't a conclusion. There's more to see over preseason to see really how this develops. But I think even the first indications of that being something that we're going to carry forward are really positive indications, because nailing things down in a really sort of clear, defined and immovable way, I think would kill a lot of players in the squad that have been here before he arrived, and will make it really, really difficult for them. And it allows us to operate with this flexibility through the rest of the window, which is that, yeah, of course we would like to maybe replace this guy and bring this guy in, or of course we'd like to move that player on and eventually get a replacement for them. But we don't need to if the offer's not correct, because we can make use of these players. We can use these players in these different ways, and they can be helpful to us next season. I think that's a really, really great way to look at it, and a much calmer, cool head way of looking at this kind of transition than we've previously seen, where it's like, we're changing style, right? Let's whack 12, 13 players in one window and see what happens, So really, really positive about that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us on the podcast. Join us on Extra Time at the end of this episode, where we are going to be joined, by Charlie and Darcy to talk about, what are we doing today? We're doing Albion Haidari. We're doing Jack Grealish. We're doing all the other players that have been linked over the course of the last week, and talking about exactly how they might fit in. We'd love to see you over there. Get the first 7 days free. So if you are a bit nervous about trying it out, you can get that chance to just see what it's like, and dip out if you don't fancy it. And I will say, really, really nice thing that we've got coming over there is we've got loads and loads and loads of scouting, transfer based stuff happening. So Darcy and I have been very hard at work recording stuff on centre backs, on midfielders, number 6s, number 8s, number 10s, strikers, goalkeepers, and Charlie is now going to be very hard at work editing all of that and putting it out on YouTube and Patreon, so you'll be seeing that over the coming weeks. And hope to join you over there, where we're literally running onto the ET recording right now. See you next week.